Here we go. Here is at the palace at Versailles. Now, Wilson is so convinced in what needs to be done that he will actually travel to France to help negotiate the treaty. So instead of sending like the Secretary of State, he personally goes over. It's like the first time the president has left the United States while in office. Yeah. But he just thinks it's that important. Yeah. So Wilson will head over to France. Slide. Now, Wilson's problem. Hang on a second, the dog is barking. Well, the dog is not barking. So Wilson goes over to France. Wilson goes over to France to personally help negotiate a settlement, a peace treaty. Okay? His problem is that the Republicans control the Senate. So any peace treaty has to be ratified by the Senate. Treaties have to be ratified by the Senate. You'll get this in government next year, so pay attention. All right? But the Republicans control the Senate. So maybe a good tactical idea would be to take a key level, high level Republican with him to help put a Republican stamp on this treaty. The person that Wilson has to worry about, among others, is this guy on your left, Henry Cabot Lodge. He is the Republican senator in charge of the House Foreign Relations Committee. Not the House, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So any treaty has to get through his committee. Okay? Might be a guy to take Lodge, but Lodge and Wilson, there's bad blood between them. I'm not sure what the particulars are. Of course, they're from opposite parties, but apparently they actively don't like each other. Wilson might have been a good idea to take, some high-level Republican. How about Theodore Roosevelt? Maybe take Theodore Roosevelt with him. Did you know that Theodore Roosevelt won the Nobel Peace Prize for his role in negotiating an end to a war between Japan and Russia back in around 1905? Of course you didn't know that because nobody ever told you except me. So Theodore Roosevelt has won the Nobel Peace Prize. Maybe take him. Trouble is, Roosevelt's got a kind of an aggressive attitude. I've got a quote here from him. Let me look at the notes here. He says, here we go. Roosevelt says, let's don't chat about peace to the accompaniment of the clicking typewriters. Let's dictate peace to the hammering guns. All right, so he says, well, we'll just keep putting pressure on Germany till it will negotiate the terms. All right. One of Roosevelt's son had been killed in the war. He was an aviator. He was an airplane pilot. Quentin Roosevelt. He's buried at the American Military Cemetery at Omaha Beach in France, by the way, if I recall, because I've been there. Anyway, Roosevelt's probably not a good guy to take. I don't know about Taft. He's not doing anything right now. But Wilson, I told you, he's kind of an academic egghead, right? He kind of just figures he knows what he's doing. So he basically takes a bunch of Democrats with him. I think there was one low-level Republican in the batch. Hang on. So Wilson has to, he goes about this on his own, basically. Slide. There he is with some of the peace commissioners. The caption is partially hidden by me, but the people go with Wilson. Okay. Now, Wilson's real problem, I've told you, they're meeting in Versailles, okay, which is a suburb of Paris, in 1919. So remember, the armistice is in November, and everyone's got to travel over there. Wilson's problem is he has to deal with the Big Four. Okay, slide. All right, here we have Lloyd George. Lloyd George is the Prime Minister of Great Britain. Orlando is, I think, the Italian, if I recall, and Clemenceau there on the right with the bushy mustache is the Frenchman, and then there's Wilson off to the right. So, the Americans have come into this war relatively late. We've only fought for a year. The French, the British, and the Italians have been fighting for 4 years. Okay? And they want something. They want a piece of German hide. Okay? And Wilson's doesn't. You're going to have to do a little give and take, right? He wants his 14 points. He's trying to prevent the next war. Okay, but the British want things that can help improve their power. The French want land back that the Germans had lost. Everybody wants something from the Germans. Okay, so it says here mandates and reparations. Mandates are the idea that Germany will be stripped of all her overseas colonies. Now, the Germans don't have a lot of colonies overseas, but they have some. Okay, and they're all going to be taken away from them and turned over to other folks. Now, this happened like the Germans had a colony in Africa. Okay? They had a city in China. The Japanese grabbed that up. This also happened to the Turks. Remember the Turks? We didn't really talk about them because it's not part of the American war effort. But the Ottoman Empire was one of the central powers. The Ottoman Empire, which is basically more or less nowadays Turkey, was stripped of its possessions down in the lower part of the Middle East. Okay? Because they had lost, their part of the war as well. And some of these possessions, they basically redrew the map of the Middle East, and this is where we get some of the problems we have today. Because they're sitting there going, well, here's a river, make a good boundary. We have these mountains. We'll draw this country. We'll call it Iraq. And someone's going, you just put the Sunnis and the Shias and the Kurds all in the same country. It won't be a problem. And so a lot of the stuff that's going on in the Middle East nowadays goes way back to these treaties signed at the end of World War I. The only one of which anyone ever talks about in American history class is the Treaty of Versailles. There's a treaty that ends the war with the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. There's a treaty that ends the war with the Bulgarians. There's one that ends the war of the Ottoman Turks. They're all named after suburbs of Paris. But the only one we need to know for our purposes is the Treaty of Versailles. Okay? So I already told you about mandates. We'll strip everything the Germans own off of them. Also, reparations. That's the idea that the Germans literally are handed a bill for the war. Okay, so the French and the British want monetary compensation for destroyed villages and slaughtered animals and all these things. Okay, so and then there's a lot of other stuff buried in the Treaty of Versailles as well. Germany's told that they, basically can't have an army anymore. They're allowed to have I think it was 100,000 man defense force. Weren't allowed to have tanks, airplanes. So they've basically been stripped of their military power. They also were officially assigned guilt for the war. I believe it was Article 231, if I recall. Basically says this was all Germany's fault, which probably is a little unfair. There's plenty of blame to go around for this thing. But anyway, Wilson, remember, he wants a peace without victory, and he wants to, do all these various things, but he's going to have to give some to what the Europeans want. But he thinks it'll all be okay if he could just get that League of Nations, that international collective security body. If we can get that established, we can help prevent the next war. Slide.